we at Fretless are basically freelancers, right? We don't build our own stuff. We work for other people. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about freelancing, how we arrived at the decision to do that, the pros and cons. I will be very honest about the cons because it is definitely not for everybody. And in the process of telling this story, I'm going to end up telling the excruciatingly detailed history of my career and how I ended up where I am. Not just because I really like talking about myself, but also because, I mean, that's part of it, but also because hopefully you can identify a little bit with the fact that like it takes a really long time, an embarrassingly long time to reach this state, whatever this is. And I absolutely feel the way you guys feel routinely. Like, oh my gosh, I can't even read this documentation. It's so above my head. Clearly, I was never meant to be in this field. Everyone's going to figure out right away that I'm a fraud, like when I try to deploy to GitHub pages and it doesn't work, and I flounder for a half hour. You know, stuff like that never stops happening. So, yeah, if you can't take it, maybe programming isn't for you. But it's okay. It's really okay, and everybody else feels the same way. So anyway, I think you know who I am by now. I hope so. And I've gone back and forth between freelancing and having real jobs really ever since I turned 16. I'm going to talk really fast because we did a lot of other stuff today. So, Strus. Rhymes with moose. Yes. Davey the Moose Strus. So, freelancing. Yeah, be your own boss. Sleep until noon. Work from home. In pajamas and slippers, right? Why? Why would you really want to do such a thing? Jeffrey Zeldman here is one of the best-known web designers in the world. Anybody happen to know who he is? A few people actually do some web design. So he was a big part of the reason that browser makers actually started implementing standards like CSS and standardized versions of HTML and JavaScript. We told the horror stories of the early days in the 90s with IE versus Netscape when they were all just doing completely proprietary stuff. He wrote a very influential blog post called "To Hell with Bad Browsers," and it actually made a difference. It was great. But he worked in advertising before striking out on his own to do web design full-time back in the late 90s. And here's how he described that decision. I was working as a creative director at a New York startup in 1999. Despite my title, I felt powerless to affect the company's product or even control our design and code. I just wanted to design simple websites that mattered and charge a fair price for my work, so I quit. Does that resonate with anyone? You haven't had enough jobs maybe yet that you've had that feeling, but my last job prior to Fretless was as an enterprise software manager and project manager for a very large organization with over 1,000 IT staff and 40,000 employees total. I was managing a big important project and managing the developers responsible for implementing it, but I was powerless. Despite my fancy title, I was not empowered to really make any decisions that affected the outcome. The real decisions were being made by people who made 3 or 4 times what I did and would probably never even lay eyes on the finished software product. And that's one of the most frustrating things about working for big organizations. The purchasing decisions are made by people who don't have to live with the consequences of those purchasing decisions. So guess what? I quit. Zeldman continues. I spent too many of my formative creative years complaining about the decisions made by the people who pay my salary. It was time to stop complaining and start creating. So reason number 1 to be a freelancer, freedom. Thanks, Google Images. You can choose what projects you work on to some degree, assuming you have enough business to be choosy, but that's the goal, right? Get enough work and create enough demand that you can choose your clients and your projects. Better yet, choose how you approach those projects, because that's big too. Another reason, flexibility. Need to schedule a dentist appointment, take your cat to the vet, make it for whatever gosh darn time you want. No one's like sitting and staring at you and making sure that you're in a chair between very specific hours. That kind of flexibility is really nice. And you can find that sometimes in real jobs. But when you're your own boss, obviously you have no one that you have to beg for this stuff. Another big plus, variety. You may find it boring to work on a single product year after year. As a freelancer, you don't have to be stuck on the same thing forever. You will change projects from time to time. But there is a certain satisfaction that comes from maintaining a single project for years, as Dave and I know from the job that we had before my horrible job before Fretless. Every once in a while, we talk about the fact that we kind of miss it because we worked on the same project for multiple years, and we got to actually see it mature and really work out those edge cases so that it was robust as heck. But seriously, freelancing is not for everyone. I have no idea what this picture is about. Presumably, you're here and majoring in what you're majoring in because you're interested in coding, using your wits and creativity to build products and solve interesting problems, right? How do you feel about sales and marketing? You like those? If you strike out on your own and you don't do that, there won't be any of that more interesting work to do. How about bookkeeping? Yeah, bookkeeping. Wow! Sound like a blast? How about management? If you start even a small agency like my partner and I did with Fretless, expect to spend time on management tasks, even if you have people who are really good at self-management. You have to do a little of that. How do you feel about being a therapist? Well, yeah, I guess there's a story that goes with that. Sometimes you may find that you have clients who just want to talk your ear off about whatever for a long time, and you have to listen and not like tell them they're idiots or whatever. We had a client once who was not an idiot, but who had had some bad experiences with developers in the past and was therefore not terribly trusting of developers in general. And, you know, sometimes he just wanted to tell me the stories of how these other developers had left him hanging. And, you know, I just listened to him and, you know, explained to him why I wasn't that person. And it worked out fine. We did eventually gain his trust, and we built a pretty cool product for him. You like networking events? Those your favorite things? Schmoozing? Yeah, me too. Haha, business. You might be surprised by how much time you have to spend doing things other than whatever service it is you're actually selling, like programming. Maybe you actually enjoy that stuff. Some people do, and I'm glad those people are out there. Or maybe it's simply worth suffering through it in order to have that level of freedom and flexibility and variety. Another thing to think about, when are you going to do that stuff if you do decide that you can take it? Because you need to spend enough of your time doing billable work that you can pay your bills, but enough time on those other things that you don't neglect them and that there's actually work to do. This is a Google Images result for time management. Yeah, good times. Time management. This guy, lots of arms, looks a little like Christian Bale, but he isn't. When you don't have traditional hours and you're ultimately working for yourself, it is very easy to work all the time. So that's another angle. You have to be really disciplined in order to get out of bed and do work in the morning and not get distracted. And you have to have the discipline to stop working eventually, or you will drive yourself to an early grave. It's very, very easy to work all the time, especially when you're doing things like a boot camp. Right? So if I scared you away, you're running straight to the nearest cubicle farm to collect your steady paycheck. There are definitely very real advantages to so-called real jobs. The biggest, stability. Stability really is the biggest advantage of a traditional job, depending on the job. Not that it's a guarantee. But if you work for like Salesforce, you can be pretty sure that your paycheck is going to clear, right? It's going to arrive on time, and they will have the money in the bank every week. Usually those jobs come with benefits beyond a steady paycheck as well. You're freelancing, you don't have that stuff, right? Your clients have to pay you. Otherwise, you don't get paid. Oh, yeah, how do you like being a collection agency? Is that what you really wanted to do with your life? Yeah, you're that too when you're a freelancer. You're a collection agency in addition to a manager and a psychologist and an accountant and everything else. Those things are huge. Sometimes I think that just because of this thing, you kind of have to be out of your mind to choose freelancing if a steady job is an option. So suppose you do want to do that. Suppose you want to be a freelancer. Where do you even start? If you do have the same brain disorder that I do that makes you want to do that. How do you know if you're ready? I don't have all the answers to this stuff, and I certainly don't have any business telling you what's right for you. But I can tell you my story, how I arrived here, for what it's worth. So come with me on a magical journey back to, 1992 or so. I started mowing lawns for money. First time I really got paid for anything other than existing. I used that money to buy a computer because I didn't have one. My family didn't have one. A couple years after I got my first computer, I got my first modem. So my computer could talk to other computers. I was mostly interested in using it to play Doom with my friends, one-on-one by dialing each other directly. But I also tried CompuServe, Prodigy, and America Online. People weren't calling it AOL yet. So I got my first email address and all that. And At that time, those services didn't include actual web access, by the way. You couldn't get to the real internet. They just had these walled gardens. And the commercial web wasn't really a thing at that point. After about 1 million free trials of AOL, I finally got real internet access around 96. I even paid for a second phone line at my house as a high school student, so there were no more conflicts over tying up the phone line. I remember one time I had been downloading an enormous file, probably 100 meg. And my sister picked up the phone, and oh my gosh, I was devastated. I had to start all over, and it takes hours and hours and hours. I now upload these files to YouTube every day. I upload 8 gigs of videos every day from this room. So a couple months after that, in 96, I started my first web design company with a couple of classmates. It sounded better than Wendy's. I had learned HTML about a month before, kind of. We were called Web Exposure because the name was available. We got a business license and a pirated copy of Photoshop. Don't pirate software, kids. It was a long time ago. And we told people we were open for business. Yeah, it is. It didn't last long, but we did get a client somehow. So I had to go work at Wendy's because it turns out that of the 3 of us, I was the only one who was really interested in actually learning how to build the things. They just liked the idea of being business people, I guess. But after I went to Wendy's for about 6 months, I convinced my parents, well, no, I just need to go solo, go completely solo. So I became Star Image Web Design because the name was available. And I made myself a cool logo with a little swoosh around it, like every single other logo in 1996. Yeah, it was pretty awesome, very original. And I got one very small client, but that was enough to replace quite a few weeks of making $5.15 an hour in fast food. I wish I remembered how I got that client in 97, but I don't. I remember being told no an awful lot, but I don't remember landing that first client. I certainly made it a very low-risk proposition for them. It was a few $100, which was a ton to me and not very much to them. And they had no web presence at all. So at worst, they went from having no website to having kind of a crappy website made by a high schooler. Then again, the handful of local businesses that did have websites had crappy websites built by high schoolers. When I did try to sell to local businesses at the time, the biggest challenge wasn't convincing them that they should let me. I should be the one to make their website. The biggest challenge was convincing them that they could benefit from a website at all. And I was pretty terrible at explaining the benefits there. So yeah, how you like sales? Yeah, sales. 98, I graduated from high school and spent the summer, yeah, everyone's calculating my age now, spent the summer working for the YMCA and endlessly redesigning my own personal site. And then I started college and kept doing freelance web design instead of getting a campus job. And that lasted for a while, through the spring and summer after my freshman year. And by then I had a few slightly bigger clients, like a whole $1,000, plus maybe a few bucks a month for web hosting. I was really determined not to get a real job. And I do remember how I got some of those clients. They were people with whom I had some sort of personal connection. Like I had a friend whose dad ran a bank, and they had no website. My family knew some folks who owned a huge biosolids business. Anybody know what biosolids is? It's crap. Yeah. When you see those big tankers driving down the semi for biosolids, yeah, that's loaded with actual poop. Pretty cool. But a very big business, and they had no website. But I ran out of sales pretty quickly and was really bad at it. So when school started back up in the fall of 99, my sophomore year, I got an internship with University Computing Services. And that was pretty traditional IT work and a preview of what a real job might look like. I was to spend a semester working the help desk. Anybody do that, by the way? No? None of you have like computing services jobs back at your colleges? Well, yeah, I understand. Me too, but I did it for a little while. So yeah, I was like pulling tapes from the tape library when the mainframe called for it. Like when a developer needed a particular piece of data, this was only 99, folks. A light would start flashing on a dumb terminal. I'd be like, okay, tape whatever you want. So I would go back to the tape library, pull it out, stick it in a drive, and someone could do their job. Yeah. They started to replace that job with robots, with a tape grabbing robot by the end of my time there. Then the summer after my sophomore year, I got an internship with the big employer from my hometown. Anybody from Kokomo? Kokomo! Yeah, it's awesome. So I got an internship there. And it paid pretty well, insanely well for a summer job, actually. And it involved building web stuff for them. And by then I had learned several programming languages, including a couple that were common on the server side, so I could build sites with persistent data and stuff. So I'd been through a year of computer science by this time, like you. I'd learned just enough programming that, like, if I tried to learn a new language, no one needed to tell me what a loop was, what a function was, what a variable was, etc. But I was spending a lot of my spare time learning web languages because in my entire 4 years, I'm not entirely sure there was an acknowledgement that there was such a thing as the internet. This wasn't that long ago. I mean, I'm a little older, but this was ridiculous at the time. So anyway, we never learned any of that stuff. But I did that stuff on the side because I liked building crap for the web and because I didn't want to have to get a real job. So anyway, I'd learned a few programming languages, so I could actually build slightly neater sites, and it was a little easier to tell people, hey, I can build a thing that's kind of cool for you. Office Space had just come out on video when I was doing that internship, and the interns spent the whole summer talking about it, as we were pretty much living it. If you're too young for Office Space, it's directed by the creator of HBO's Silicon Valley. Despite the overall nature of the organization that I was interning at, which was a huge bureaucratic organization, I was lucky to be working in a division that no one was paying much attention to, except for my immediate supervisor, so I still got to do cool stuff. If you can make it through life without having a traditional job, I'm happy for you. If you're determined to work for yourself but can't pull it off just yet, I think your time with traditional employment will be well spent. You'll learn a ton about working with others, getting things done when you have zero power. And more than that, it's pretty darn hard to truly learn without experiencing. So, like, for one thing, you'll learn what those jobs are like. And those people are going to be your clients if you are a freelancer. So knowing what their day-to-day is like and developing some empathy for them is useful, because it's easy for people who are prone to being arrogant and condescending to think, oh, those suckers who work there. Everyone's just trying to do their thing, right? Everyone's got their life, and it's freelancing isn't for everybody. So experiencing that is honestly a pretty good thing, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the part where I actually got a real job. This was just an internship. So in the fall, I started kind of the relevant portion of my university internship. And I've had an experience that I've since learned is pretty common in internships and what this program is designed to avoid. So the full-timers who were supposed to supervise me at this internship were pretty annoyed to have an intern at all. It just created more work for them. I wasn't helping them. I was just keeping them from doing their job because they had to come up with something for me to do. It was like, well, what can a person with no experience do that won't hurt anything? Pretty much nothing. So they had to waste part of their day to come up with just something to keep me out of their hair so I wouldn't ask them any questions. And I was forced to have an intern once at one of my jobs, and I felt really bad for the intern because truly there was nothing they could do for me. But hey, it was a better paying campus job than some of the others. I felt terribly sorry for them. My boss when I was an intern didn't feel sorry for me. He just wished I would hurry up and die or something. So anyway, I quit the internship before it was over. And now that I'd done that internship in the summer, I was newly emboldened by having had semi-real job experience and knowing a few more programming languages. So I doubled down on freelancing, still in college. I'd run out of ideas for finding clients myself. I was not getting any better at sales. So I teamed up with my cousin in Illinois, and we started an actual S-Corp, a corporation. It was like a real company. We had ink in our name. We had a lawyer. Speaking of which, our lawyer didn't have a website, so we made one for him. And I learned in session 1, because I made the mistake of telling them the name of that company. This was 2000. My lawyer from then is still using the website that I made for him in 2000. I kid you not. Shockingly, it doesn't look nearly as embarrassing as most things that I made that year. But yeah, holy crap. Yeah, okay, later. It's not. SteveScheffler.com. So my cousin found me quite a few gigs at that point because he was really good at charming the skin off a snake. And at this point, I really, really wanted to drop out of college, move to Illinois, and just do that full time. My parents actually bribed me to stay in. They said they'd pay my room and board if I stayed in college one more year and finished. And that was probably a good thing because my cousin was also a full-time real estate agent at the time and had decided to become a full-time law student as well. So pretty soon he didn't have a whole lot of time to find work for me anymore. But I kept the corporation alive and did a little bit of freelancing on the side for many years. But it would be a while before it would be my full-time job again. So I graduated from college in 2002, and I got a job for a tiny, tiny software company. In very short order, I was the only developer at that place. They fired everybody else. There was more than 100% turnover my first month. We went from more people quit or were fired that month than worked there. It was pretty amazing. After 6 months, I decided it wasn't for me, so I quit and started teaching at a for-profit college. One of those that really they ought to be illegal. It wasn't terribly fulfilling, but it was kind of fun teaching. So I got a couple of job offers at that point, and I took one of them. And that one was a really bad fit, and they reached that conclusion before I had a chance to quit, so yeah, that happened. But I got another job right away. For those of you keeping track, that is 4 jobs my first year out of college. But hey, that last one lasted a while. I did a tiny bit of freelancing on the side throughout the 7 years that I was there. For those of you like 9 minus 3, that's 6. No, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That is 7 years. Anyway. But mostly I had a real job, and I kind of liked it. And toward the end of that, I started getting involved in meetups and other events, and generally felt like I had found a community where I belonged. And it became clear that I had done all I could really do at that job. And really, the major thing was I got married around that time. So I moved to Bloomington and took a job in enterprise software management. And I was absolutely miserable. So we started Fretless, and that's what I still do. So a little bit more about the Fretless story and how that all transpired. So that job that I was at for 7 years, I started out doing one thing, totally unrelated. And then someone saw that I had written some stuff for myself to keep track of my work. Just really kind of simple stuff, no more complex than the stuff we built in this class. They're like, oh, you can do stuff like that? Well, hey, we've got a call center, and they just keep track of everything in text files. Like, holy crap. So, hey, you should build something like that for them. I was like, okay. So I built a thing. And then they're like, this is awesome. Can you add this feature? Like, okay. I just got out of college, and I've never worked with another programmer before, so I've never learned any good habits. But sure, I'll just add all the features. So for the next 3 or 4 years, that's what I did. I added all the features. And it was entirely up to me to improve as a programmer. Because, again, I wasn't looking at anyone else's code. I wasn't sitting next to someone else who was also learning and encouraging me, and we weren't exciting each other about new things that we could learn. So it was entirely self-motivated. And I got so I could make stuff that worked pretty darn well. If you remember the scale of awesomeness from the very beginning of class, does it work? Does it work well? Yeah, it did. Usability-wise, it was pretty darn good. It was very robust. There were no errors. But holy cow, was it hard to add new features, because this was just building and building on a thing that was built by someone who didn't have any idea how to organize code. So after about 4 years, I suggested a full rewrite, which is a very scary thing. And most of the time when you think you ought to do it, you probably shouldn't. But sometimes you should. And in this case, it did work out because they could afford for me to take some time to rewrite it. And I said, hey, I'm going to need some help. Can I hire another developer? They're like, sure. Okay, you're a manager now. Cool. So I hired this guy named Miles. Had his haircut, made him look like Wolverine. Had earrings and stuff. I was like, this guy. And then after about a half hour, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy. So then I did have that thing that I described. I was sharing an office with another developer just a little younger than me who, had already become a little jaded and cynical like I had. But once we got talking to each other, then it was like, oh my gosh, there's this cool new thing. We should try this cool new thing. Oh my gosh, have you heard about test-driven development? Oh my gosh, we should learn test-driven. We should totally do test-driven development on the full rewrite here. And you're like, yeah, we should. And, pretty soon after that, so what we were doing, this was about the time that Ruby on Rails came out. So we started rewriting this whole thing in Ruby on Rails instead of PHP. And then Miles was like, oh my gosh, there's a local meetup for Ruby. And I was like, oh, I'm afraid of networking events. And Miles was like, I'm a super extrovert. Come with me. So we went to this meetup, and I don't remember how many weeks or months it was, but pretty soon Miles actually took over the meetup, and he's still running it. One person I think in this class, one person in this class actually went last week. But then it was like, oh my gosh, it's a whole room full of people who feel like this, who get really excited about improving the quality of their code, like taking pride not just in the thing that you're building, but like in how good and readable your code is afterward. This is amazing. There are people like this. Because like my exposure to other programmers, since I didn't work with any, you know, there are a lot of programmers who aren't really people, and who kind of hate other human beings, or who maybe like them but try too hard to impress them and so come across as jerks. And so I was like, I don't really want to join a programming community because that's how they'll all be. They'll all be really dismissive and try to make me feel stupid. But this community wasn't like that. It was awesome. Met so many people. There was this guy there at the very first meeting named Dave Jones. Never saw that guy again. No, he's at the back of the room, right? So we did that for a couple of years. And then, yeah, I moved to Bloomington and got a different job that made me miserable. But before I left, we were like, hey, Dave Jones, you should come work here at that place. And so Dave Jones came and worked at that place. And I don't know, how long was it after I left that Miles left? Like, was it a year or like 9 months after I left Inframe? How long till Miles left? How long did you guys actually work together on that? Do you remember? About 3 months. Yeah. So here's what we did. We like suckered Dave into coming here to work with us, and then we both quit. Dave stayed there for about 3 years. I know that because I stayed at my other job for 3 years before, and I only learned the origin story of Fretless, as it turns out, a very short time ago because I didn't know this part. Miles was at a, oh yeah, spoiler alert, Miles is my co-founder. Miles was at a local developer conference, and the speaker was talking about like figuring out how you work best. Do you work best as part of a team or on your own or whatever? And Miles was like, I by this time he was a completely solo freelancer. He was like, yeah, I think I work best alone. No, I totally don't work best alone. I should text Dave. So he texted me, and this one, not that one, at that moment. So he texted me and was like, hey, do you want to start a, yes, please save me from this place. I got to get out of here. Let's start something. So we started Fretless. And then before I quit my job, we did have a client lined up. So we knew we weren't going to starve for at least like 6 weeks. And again, super extrovert Miles. So people wanted to work with him. It was cool. So about 3 months in, we got a pretty good gig. And we were like, hey, we need another person. So guess who we called? Dave Jones. So we just go around stealing Dave Jones from whoever he works for. And that's kind of what we do. That's on our business card. Dave's a super cool dude. And so we've been doing that now for 4.5 years. And it's great. And we can work with people who share that enthusiasm for learning new things because you absolutely never stop doing that, or you become a bad programmer if you do stop. So hopefully the enthusiasm is a little infectious. Hopefully you get the idea that we're enthusiastic about this stuff from these last 3 weeks. Otherwise, I don't know. And we're enthusiastic about people's birthdays too. So anyway, that's the Fretless story real quick. And then we have another story for you in just a moment. So anyway, that's the excruciatingly detailed version of my career and how I got here.